Hey everyone, today I want to share a line that we can play as black in the two knights defense that we get after e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to f6, bishop to c4, and here we play knight to f6. In this position, the move knight to g5 is actually very common and very tempting, putting pressure on f7. And here the most common move that has been studied a lot is the move d5, but I want to share with you a very exciting line, which is the move bishop to c5. Leading the game to the Traxler counterattack. In a way, the move bishop to c5 is very logical because black is developing, already gaining a development advantage, but on the other hand, black is leaving the pawn f7 undefended. And white has to do something drastic because otherwise black will simply castle and then play the move h6, and then kick away that knight. At the very least, black is going to push for an advantage in those lines because black will get better development. So white has three ways to deal with this line. All of them have to be quite forcing. White has two ways to take on f7, or another idea that we see later is the move d4. But let's start with one of the two most logical ways to continue, which is to take on f7. Taking with the knight looks very tempting because we also get a fork. So if black moves the queen, white will simply capture on h8. But here we can see black's main idea, which is to take on f2. Now here white has two main options, to take on f2 or to go king to f1. If white goes king to e2, then knight to d4 will come with a check. So in this line, a tempo is absolutely crucial. So white cannot give a tempo for free. So let's start with the most logical move, which is taking the bishop, because black is sacrificing more material. But black's idea is to take on e4 with the knight, giving a check, and then try to attack white's king. So here white's best try is to go king to g1, but just to show you how white can go wrong fairly easily. After the move king to e1, queen to h4 is going to be devastating. If the king moves, the queen will invade on f2, and after g3, black captures on g3, and there are too many pieces attacked. The rook, the king, also the bishop, so white is not going to last long here. For example, after white takes the knight, black can take on h1. If the king goes to e2, knight to d4 is very strong, or after bishop to f1, black can simply castle and continue attacking white's pieces. White has to be the one being very careful to keep the balance. After king to g1, queen to h4 is putting a lot of pressure on white. The position is absolutely crazy, but it should be balanced with correct play. In any case, the main idea is to go queen to f2 and give a checkmate. If white goes h3, at the very least, white will get a perpetual. After queen to f2 and queen to g3, although black can try to play for more with a move like rook to f8. If white tries g3, then black is again willing to sacrifice material to attack, and after white captures and queen takes, king to f1, black has sacrificed two minor pieces, but white's king on f1 doesn't look very safe. Here black can continue with the move rook to f8, pinning the knight. There are also ideas to go queen to f4, collecting the bishop. So even though objectively this position might be balanced, it is definitely white the one who has to be careful. And just in case, let me mention another idea for white here is to go queen to e2 to cover f2, but here knight to d4 will attack the queen, and after the queen moves and knight takes, attacking the queen and queen to e2. Here taking on a1 might be an idea, but white is ready to take on h8, so we don't want to trade pieces here. Instead we can go knight to d4, at the very least black has a repetition after knight to c2 and queen to e2, or black can even try to play for more by going rook to f8. So after knight takes f7 and bishop takes f2, taking the bishop leads to crazy positions where black doesn't even seem to be doing worse, and king to f1 is an interesting try for white, definitely difficult to play if you had this position for the first time as white. And after queen to e7 and knight takes, here black has a very interesting move, which is to go d5. Planning to go bishop to g4, so if white takes on d5 with the bishop, after bishop to g4, black will trap the queen on d1. So here I'm going to focus on the best moves for white, otherwise black will get a great position, so here taking on d5 is the best try for white. And after knight to d4, now again we threaten bishop to g4, d6 is the best try by white, and after queen takes, go knight to f7, and after queen to c1, and d3, now black goes bishop to g4, and after queen to d2, bishop to h4. So white has an extra rook but white pieces are very poorly coordinated. There's an idea to go b5, attacking the bishop, which protects the knight on f7. And here again, I'm focusing on the best moves for white. Knight to c3 or b4 are the best tries for white. And after b5 and b4, here black can try to go queen to e7 or even queen to b6, keeping an eye on this diagonal. And again, the position is just pretty crazy. Bishop to d5 is the best move. And here black can take on d5 and then go queen to c6, attacking white's pieces. Even if white has knight takes e5 and after queen takes and knight takes, black can castle long. Black still has a very strong initiative here. Or if white plays a natural move like bishop to b3, this is actually a mistake, because here black has a very strong idea after bishop to e2, we give a check, and after knight takes b3, there's an attack on the queen, and also queen to f2 threatens a checkmate, so white has nothing better than going queen to e3, and in this line black will get the material back after we trade queens, and we take on a1, so this is even a better position for black. So taking on f7 with the knight and going bishop takes f2 leads to very crazy lines. The best try for white is amazingly to go king to f1, but even here white doesn't have a clear way to get a strong advantage. But let's evaluate the other two alternatives. Another idea is to take on f7 with the bishop, and now black's main idea is to go king to e7. So even though black cannot castle anymore, white is losing time, moving minor pieces several times, and now black is ready to go rook to f8, put pressure on the f-file. So in these lines, black should be doing fine, at least from a practical point of view. But let's evaluate some ideas. Bishop to d5 is normally played by strong players here, but a move like bishop to b3 makes sense. White has to move the bishop because otherwise h6 will attack the knight and then black will capture the bishop on f7. But here after bishop to b3 we can go rook to f8. The main idea for black here is to go rook to f8, d6 and develop quickly. For example, after white castles, otherwise there's going to be strong pressure on f2, d6. If white plays solid moves like d3, now we kick away the knight and then we go bishop to g4. Black's play is very natural. Knight to d4, knight to h5 is coming. Bishop to e3 here looks like a good try for white because white wants to challenge this very strong bishop. But even here we have this very interesting idea of going knight to h5 with the idea to take on f3, double white's pawns, and also fighting for the f4 square. Now bishop to d5 is another alternative for white, and here black has a few options, but we can continue with this main plan of going rook to f8 and d6. And in the game that I selected where white is a very strong player, white tried to be a bit more ambitious, trying to go d4, and after bishop to g4, here white went queen to e1, white didn't want to get the knight pinned, and now after h6, white has to be careful even to have an equal position. White went d4, if white goes knight to f3, then after black takes on f3 and knight to h5, white has too many weaknesses on the king side. Queen to d7 and queen to h3 is an idea, so black is even trying to get a checkmate in attack in this line. So white tried queen to e1, and after h6, white went d4 instead of knight to f3, which is a very interesting idea for white. Here black decided to move the bishop. Taking on e5 is quite risky because white is ready to open the e-file. For example, after we take, white can take on c6 and then try to go e5. So this is quite risky for black. But instead after bishop to b6, h3, black took on g5, and after white took on g4, queen to d7, black is ready to take on g4, and black had a very good position and the game ended in a draw. Now here I want to show you the best line given by the engine for white, which is to move the bishop. It can go to c4 or to b3, and then after we follow this idea of going rook to f8, castle, d6, here the engine suggests knight to c3, with the idea to go knight to d5 in some lines. Even so, this position is quite crazy. There might even be ideas to go queen to e8 and then king to d8 if white gives a check on d5. And the point is that after going h6, if white goes knight to f3, here black is doing fine. There's also another idea in this line to go queen to e8 and then bring the queen to the king side. But the line given by the engine is pretty crazy, but in any case I want to show it to you, which is to go knight to h7, And after black takes on h7, knight to d5, giving a check, and after the king goes to e8, queen to h5, the king is getting attacked. If it goes to d7, queen to g4 is very strong, and after rook to f7, there's a discover attack after the move knight to b6. So these are just very crazy moves. If a human has this position for the first time, these moves are not going to be played, but the idea is that there's an attack on f7 and on a8, but even in this line after knight to g5, white can get material after bishop takes, and knight takes a8, but after the move bishop to d7, black is collecting the knight, white can get another pawn, but after queen takes, we get this very crazy position where even though the engine gives white an advantage, black has 3 minor pieces for a rook and 2 pawns, which materially should be good for white, but black has all the pieces developed, where white only developed the queen to h5, so at least from a practical point of view, this position doesn't look very clear to me. Now, before I move on to the last preparation, studying openings alone is not enough to become a stronger player. If you want to seriously get better at chess, I have a free course that will provide you with a training plan for that, so feel free to check the link in the description. So the last alternative that white has here is to go d4, and the main idea is to sacrifice a pawn before taking on f7. So if we take on d4, for example with the knight, then after knight takes f7, we get into these lines where the move d4 is useful for white because now white has activated more pieces. So even though that is not entirely clear, here black has a more interesting alternative, which is to go d5. So in similar style, white goes d4, we go d5, now we attack the bishop, and in this line, white has a very narrow path to fight for an advantage. For example, if white takes on d5 with the pawn, after knight takes d5, black is doing great, but here black can try taking with the bishop, and after white takes with the bishop, now we take with the knight. Now we have the extra option of taking on d5 in some lines. So here white normally takes with the bishop on f7. If white takes with the knight, then after queen to e7 and knight takes, before taking on d5, we can go bishop to g4. And even though this position is pretty crazy, the main point is that this knight is normally going to be trapped, and we're going to castle long, so black has a very strong initiative. This is a very dangerous position for white. And after bishop takes and king to e7, we get very similar positions to the line where white takes on f7 straight away, even though we just traded a bunch of pawns. And here white normally goes bishop to c4. And here the main idea is to go rook to f8. We can play the move b5 before playing rook to f8. And after bishop to d3, go rook to f8. We get a position where black has very good development to compensate for just one pawn. For example, if white wants to get greedy here and take the pawn on b5 after attacking the knight by going c3, we simply move the knight, and after bishop takes, we can just trade queens and then go knight to g4, planning to take on f2, so here black is getting some material back and still having a very comfortable position. So hope that you enjoyed this line, which is actually quite crazy and fairly sound. Amazingly, when I first analyzed it, I wasn't sure about it. You can definitely play it on games with quick time controls, but you can also try it for longer games as well. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.